Welcome to What People Miss. This is a podcast about the subtleties of life. You may have heard Mozart say that the music is not in the notes, but in the silence between them. I believe the same is true of life, that life is truly lived in the breaths between the large or the bigger moments. Hi, I'm Cordelia Gaffar, the ultimate joy goddess, inviting you to choose joy and pleasure so that you savor your life. Now, enjoy today's conversation. Hello, and welcome to What People Miss. I am so excited to be here with one of my, I guess you're kind of like a classmate, but not really because you're ahead of me in the Institute. But it's great to be able to have like a real conversation about Black sexual liberation with someone from the Institute, right? So,
Yes.
and I didn't ask you this before we started recording, but do I call you Master Queen?
Just queen. Yep, queen or mixed queen. Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
Max Queen. Okay. And so you're a licensed somatic sex therapist and certified hypnotherapist, energy work and breathwork facilitator, and an author of Erotic Liberation and a
Yeah.
and creator. Like, tell me, like, what does that mean? Like, how did you embark on this path for yourself?
I think like most of us who are in this healing work, like our personal informs our professional. And so for me, it was always trying to find a sense of worth, right? And being able to, and also intuitively rejecting what is white supremacist understandings of like Black femininity, my own family dynamics. And so now that works look like, yes, centering Black liberation, Black sexual liberation specifically. And as an erotic liberation author, it is really about, I have resources. I have the erotic intelligence book, Healing the Erotic Self, which really helps you unpack the messages that you've been taught about desirability, especially in Black bodies and bodies that are marginalized, like Black, queer, and trans folks. And then I've created In My Healing Erotic Affirmations Journal, because we need to be able to create narratives and scripts that are rooted in our worthiness, our safety, and our intuitive trust. And so this introduces language to that, like how to replace those negative self beliefs. And then shift a self liberation practice is a somatic healing practice about, we're going to be activated. We've have trauma responses. And so how do you learn the internal dialogue of coaching yourself to safety? And so those three works, in addition to some digital meditations, the meditations that I have available, and the live healing intensive, is really that whole self healing approach that is often missed in therapy. And so while therapy started this work and absolutely informs this work, ancestrally spirit was like, and there's more things for you to consider. And so that is how the work came along. And like, so I was doing it in session with folks, and I was like, oh no, hold on, this needs to be something that other people can actually do. And so that's how that work came along. And then with the erotic embodiment healing intensive, it was like, all right, now we have to show up every day in our lives and do this work. This is not cosplay. This is not code switching. This is, for Black folks particularly who have survived the oppression of US imperialism. It was absolutely about, all right, now we need to practice who we want to become. And I frame it through the work of being a lover. We all want love. Most of us want love, and most of us consider ourselves lovers. And so, how are we doing that from a place that's really fulfilling and outside of the white gaze, right? We've kind of fallen into the psych op trap of gender wars, which don't exist. And so, my work is really about disrupting that. And that's really how I came into it outside of my own life, my own decision making. And I was like, yeah, nah, enough is enough. enough is enough. And so this is my offer. These are my offerings.
I love that.
Thank
You
you.
really, yeah, I mean, it's like, first of all, I love at the end how you said these are my offerings. You know what I mean? Because I feel like a lot of people in this spiritual space, in this sexual spiritual space, have a different come from.
Yes, yes, absolutely. To me, the sexual is spiritual, and this is about me being absolutely in my divinity, especially as a queer and non-binary person, right? To understand my expansiveness and the relationship to power, right? The erotic has helped me reestablish a relationship to power that is really anchored in my center. Something we learn in the institute is about how do we find our center, right? And avoid dissolve self-doubt. And so yes, this is an offering which also says consent. Folks don't have to like what I'm saying. They don't have to like who I am, right? They have that choice. My attention is to focus on those who are ready to receive my offerings. That's alignment. The word offerings
Absolute,
is about alignment.
yes, absolute alignment. I love that. And before we began, also, I wanted to make sure that our conversation not just edifies the work that you do, but also to
Mm,
educate, and inform and help, people understand. Because like last week, I had a conversation with a functional movement specialist who talks about,
awesome.
the body from that perspective.
Yes,
And like now we must talk about the body from like, what do people most often miss about the true meaning of Black sexual liberation? Body lens first, you know?
yeah, I think what people miss is that they haven't been taught it all, right? And so if you don't understand the difference between sexuality, and sexual, right? Like that's a great place to start. To me, that's some 101 stuff. Sex is not about behavior. It really is about the biology of being able to procreate, right? Our secondary and primary hormones, our breasts, our genitals, and those functionings, right? Sexuality is about all of who we are. It's both sexual and non-sexual. It's how we get dressed. It's how we wear our hair. It's the makeup we choose. It's the hair we choose. It's the glasses we choose, right? Sex is in every room. The room that your viewers are in right now or listeners right now, like sexuality is already in the room. How you designed it, what shoes you wear. And then sexual is about the intention of using erotic energy for the purpose of sexual pleasure, right? The female body has this wonderful organ called the clitoris that is absolutely about nothing but pleasure. And so this is what I think most people get misunderstood is that they feel like they already have an understanding of sex and sexual liberation, as in like I can with there's no discernment. And so people are missing a lot of parts and they don't realize it because they feel like they have a relationship to sex that informs them about a collective liberation experience.
I think that when we use the word liberation, to your point, that we abandon discipline, right?
Yes.
These words like
Yes.
being free sexually and sexual liberation are not synonymous, right? Because
Absolutely.
what I'm really hearing you say is like you're empowering yourself
Yes.
to use, to actually choose how you use your body when it comes to sexual interactions and non-sexual.
Absolutely. 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 And to recognize that that body is housing a spirit, right? To recognize that when we are decolonizing our understanding of sexuality, what we're also doing too is we're humanizing our experience. We're creating, you said choose, right? So that means we are activating choice. Whereas in sexual oppression has been largely the experience, particularly of, descendants of formerly enslaved folks on Turtle Island, right, in the US continent. And so we we come from that lens, not necessarily understanding that we can actually create our own from our storytelling. from our way, not from a place of like respectability and acceptance from dominant forces. I'll say dominant forces, but oppressed powers. Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah.
imperialism.
Yeah. And so, fuck that. We ain't doing that. We ain't
Not
doing that.
anymore.
Not
No.
anymore, right? And dead ass, if we're truthful about it, we have never. But because we listen to who is telling the story and we're not listening to our own stories, we believe what other people's stories are about us, which is why also too, the perception of other people is more important than our perception of ourselves. And so if we listen to our ancestors, we're here because somewhere pleasure was experienced.
Yeah.
Right. And so the fact that even with Black sexual liberation, two truths can hold the same space. Pain and pleasure can hold space together.
Yeah.
Yes.
So historically, like if we were to take some ways, right, we know about the breeding plantations, right? And the atrocities that went on there.
Hmm.
What does sexual liberation look like when we think of how we can play, with sex for healing?
One of the things I often think about and I teach folks about is understanding erotic intelligence. And erotic intelligence is being able to navigate our choices of our desires with the chaos of everyday living. And that there are 5 areas of erotic intelligence: body attunement, which is somatic, um, social intelligence, which is about our relationships, emotional intelligence, which is about our ability to manage the intensity and the responses of our emotions, creative imagination, which I call erotic curiosity, and what's called like a presence practice on steroids, which I call your presence practice, right? And so, or lovership. And so I think one of the things that we can take away is that intuitively we have erotic intelligence, but we don't have a relationship to it. And that intuitive part is about safety and trust that our ancestors had. Right. What we have to remember is that our ancestors still experienced love. Why? Because families existed. And those enslavers purposely broke up those families, but those families were created from a place of love, right? A place of choice, a place of power. And they would have us believe that we never had any. And so for me, that's one of the ways in which I kind of introduce people to the unlimited possibilities of their own life and their own desires. Um, Once they activate permission, the ability to explore their erotic curiosity.
And a lot of the people that I work with, do I want to use the word shy? Not shy. I mean, they tiptoe into it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because of the conditioning, right? And
Yes.
the way you explain the distinction between spiritual, like the erotic being spiritual, as opposed to, right? In
The
Christianity,
sexual. Hmm.
right? We're taught that it's prohibited, it's against God and all those things. So like,
Yes. The fact that we talk about Eve, but we don't talk about Lilith. Right. And the fact that Eve was actually not the one at fault, right? And so people who are telling stories, and how are we receiving the stories that we told, which honestly started my journey because the church rejected me. They rejected me because I was a single mom. They rejected me because I questioned things, right? There's a blind obedience that the Black church, in my experience, had expected, that I was like, the God I serve would want me to be discern. I didn't have the word discerning, but would want me to question choices and the ability to make those choices. Um, and so, yeah, it's important for folks to recognize when we think about religion versus spirituality that being able to unpack that relationship really clearly, and especially from a imperialism perspective, is liberation.
It
Like
is.
that in itself is liberation. Liberation is not going to be this one event. It is it's the accumulation of a series of internal events. And the first one for me was questioning why,
Well, yeah.
why, right? And love versus fear.
Yeah. I
And
feel like even, oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
I feel like even when it comes to loving, fear is also present. You know, I have conversations like you. My work has been attracting men recently, right? And what do they want to talk about? Their fears when it comes to commitment, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And it's like very consuming. It's like, um, what if she takes this from me? What if she takes that from me? What, you know what I mean? And I'm thinking to myself, where's the love? Why do you care about the things? You
Literally, do you trust yourself to make a discerning decision about, I think, even defining love? One
Yeah.
thing I love about Bell Hooks All About Love is that she talked about there's this concept of love, but no clear definition, right? You're going to ask 10 different people, what is love? You're going to get 10 different definitions. And so the definition she liked was the one about N. Scott Peck, a psychiatrist. And he said, love is the will to support one's own or another's spiritual growth.
Mm,
And that in that, right, that there is love as action. So not just this intense emotion of affection, but it was intention that showed up in action, and those actions were informed by respect, by trust, by clear communication, right? And there are some other points that she mentioned, and I was like, yes, because part of love is taking a calculated risk. There's no
yes.
love without risk. But in, a colonized society, we've been taught to avoid risk at all costs.
Yeah.
And so we, especially as particularly Black men, have been emotionally neglected in mental health spaces, and historically doesn't negate the fact that they're still responsible once you identify neglect of having those needs met, those wounds tended to. But also, too, your relationship to rejection sensitivity is a wound. And so the what ifs are about things that don't exist. What does exist? And so if love exists, then that's the relationship people should lean into and build on. And so I appreciate men seeing that they need to be able to do this work. There's some who are doubling down on the no, we need to make it easier. Maybe that's not our role. It's never been our role. And for any woman who's hurt you in the past, right? I'm sorry she didn't have the capacity. Folks have probably done her wrong too, but the accountability piece, love is also accountability. Part of the Amina Institute of Embodiment and Healing is about looking at our code of ethics and our values, and it's rooted in love. And like, so what does love actually look like in interaction is where we are now, is where we are now. And so, yeah, it shows up. And also, what are you doing about it?
Yeah.
What are you doing about it?
This is where I think it speaks to what erotic and emotional intelligence is,
Hmm.
being understanding where you are emotionally and also where you are with your own erotic self, you know?
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
are you,
Sexual shadow work.
yeah, are you present with that? And
Yes.
oh, I think that would just be so beneficial to so many Black men.
Everybody, all of us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
all of us,
And
but I feel like
but for
they're,
Black men, it's
yeah.
needed. Absolutely. It's needed because, you ever have that we've talked about, like, sometimes folks get left behind. And so we're seen as a collective of folks who are being very loud because they've been left behind. Um, and also, right? And so I think the liberation of the both and, right, is very important because people get stuck in the either or. I
Mhm.
didn't get this. right? And so it's, yeah, and so you didn't, but you have the self-awareness, right? That emotional regulation and intelligence piece is about self-awareness. One of the components, there's 5 components of emotional intelligence, and one of those components is self-awareness. Being self-aware is not enough, which is why erotic intelligence requires you to be present. That's awareness, intention, and effort. And so when you come behind self-awareness with intentional effort, now you're changing that energy of powerlessness, that energy of pity, the energy that rejection sensitivity has you very anxious, avoidant about love. And now you're able to really alchemize and change that energy into something that allows you to engage with learning. And then, like, consent, it's all about consent, right? And so that's what we want, for folks to understand from this conversation continuing, is like, where do you give yourself permission to show up for yourself? Because I know that as space holders, as guides, it's a co-regulation process. We don't do this work on our own. We guide people to what they already have inside.
Yeah.
I love this conversation. Thank you so much for having it, because it's necessary.
Yeah. You're so welcome. I was so excited when you said yes. I was like, yay. Finally, I can have a real conversation about this. So, um,
That part.
yeah, and it's so necessary. So, I know that we're going to get deeper and deeper as we go along. So, I'm I'm thinking that we're going to just keep this one like, what do you say? We'll go 101 and 201 in this conversation.
Yes, right. Yes, because some of you all maybe just be getting this for the very first time, and you're like, "What?" Don't be overwhelmed, right? And I think also too, you made the point about like feeling behind, and for clarity, even though the face is baby, right? The grades let y'all know this is baby elder, right? And so as a woman in her 50s, is also to recognize too, wherever you're showing up in this journey is exactly where you're supposed to, because spiritual ascension is a thing. And we need to be activated spiritually in order to be able to receive this. And so don't be overwhelmed by any of this. What you're going to receive is what you're going to receive. And then, yes, come back to this and to other conversations we're going to have, because it's all going to be in alignment for you.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the encouraging word I want to offer to folks.
Yeah. Thank you for that, because it can be really overwhelming. I know, like, for me, I would say probably I've really been on this path for about 8 years, but I didn't like seek the actual education until about 4 years ago. You know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
like the distinction between where I was roughing it and thinking that I knew to like being with real, teachers and masters in this who live this way and practice this way. And now I find it so easy to practice and live this way, and there's
Yes,
more.
yes,
There's so much
yes.
more.
It's so much more. And I think that's what gives me so much joy, is that, like, wait, I get to learn more, I get to experience more. And it's like, there is yes, the hard part, but then there's the sweet spots, there's the honey spots, there's the spots that's just like what I call orgasmic living. So it's like erotic living, and that helps us reach orgasmic living. And
Yes.
so it's this extreme experience of ecstasy and pleasure, right? More often than not.
And just for a kick, right?
Oh God, yeah.
Because I'm
And
over 50 also, like you, right? I call it multi-orgasmic living, right? Because like, right? What a myth. What a myth, right? That
yeah,
we stop having orgasms and we can't have more than one once we get this age or over.
that part. Listen, when I realized, as I hit 32, 35, and I was like, they lied to us. This shit is getting better. I'm getting better. And then perimenopause happened. That's another story for another time. But It gets better as you get older.
Indeed, it does. So,
All right.
no, I don't feel like we tangent it too much, but I wanted to just give a little bit of space for people to digest what we came.
Yes.
What I mean,
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're gonna be taking notes and trees and like, yes, I appreciate that. So no, we're right where we're supposed to be.
yeah. So everyone who's listening, you can resume taking notes and get back in here.
Yes.
Um,
Altar call.
yeah. I really would like to know, like, how how can we create more of a connection, right, between pleasure, embodiment, and freedom for Black communities, and why is it vital, especially in this political environment?
It's vital because shame has oppressed us for too long, right? The response to the sexual violence we received as a collective of being on these shores has been about rejecting white gaze or white assumption of non-discerning sexual predatoriness, right? And so the response to that is to go the extreme opposite, right? Which is to repress everything. And when you repress everything, that means you can't experience joy either. And so now joy becomes something that we judge, right? Oh, you being too much. Why are you so loud? It wasn't that serious, right? And so the reason why it's so important to be able to relearn your relationship to pleasure and embodiment is because you want to learn shame, right? When we think about activating choice, you want to be able to activate choice from a place of what we learn in authentic consent, a place that is somatically safe for our yes, nos, and our maybes. And so this is one of the reasons why it's so important because self-regulation is not going to happen without co-regulation. Babies need, as I start to have a hot flash, babies need to have skin to skin contact because they have spent 9 to 10 months co-regulating with their birthing parent. And so the skin to skin contact and the continuous contact is about that co regulation piece, which is what we need for our wholeness. It is not about being in relationship. You need to be in a relationship, right? Like a romantic relationship, because all relationships are important platonic, familial, sexual, intimate, right? They're all important. But part of the collective liberation is about relating. And so we need to be able to understand our relationship to consent, to safety, to our intuition, which is part of our nervous system. Our intuition is not out there, our intuition is in here, right? And so being able to understand the messages that prevent us from asking for our needs, whether it's sexual or non sexual, is important. And that's why it's important to really be in relationship with your embodiment practices. And like, how does freedom, pleasure, and embodiment show up? Because freedom, the ability to make this power is the ability to make decisions and the ability to act on the decisions that we make.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. And so freedom is not being restricted from that access. Liberation is the continuous access and embodiment of that freedom practice. And so it's important to do that because a lot of people out here thinking they're free and maybe not, right? Maybe not. And so that's important because relationship repair is part of this, part of the freedom. Shit's not always gonna be sweet. And so when the person who breaks your heart, is there room for repair? And in order to be able to do that, you have to have a relationship to your yes, nos, or maybes that's safe. And that's the work that we do, right? Is to help people like navigate their values and their standards. And so it gets deep. And I may be getting too deep right now, but it's just like it's it's all of these reasons why it's important. I just came from the last year or so working with high school students. And I know these babies are lost because their elders are lost, right? They're out here making decisions. I'm like, where did you learn that from? Who's teaching? Who? And we're socialized gender wise to receive two different messages. My boys were like, I always ask my guys, I'm like, all right, give me one thing in life you're looking forward to, right? Because as a crisis therapist, I'm also making sure that folks feel safe enough that they're not considering suicidal ideation. And if they are considering suicidal ideation, then there's other steps and practices and supports I need to be able to activate. And so, but I ask this forward, hopeful, informed question about give me one thing in life you're looking forward. I don't care if it's in the next hour, this weekend, or, when you get older, which could be next year. My boys are like, I'm ready. I'm looking forward to having my own family, right? White boys, black boys, same. I'm looking forward to having my own family. Sometimes black boys will be like, I'm looking forward to being successful or having a successful career. My girls, my black girls, it is always I would say I would say at least 92% of the times, use our famous 92, but always it is like, oh, to be successful, no doubt. Like they want to be able to be successful because it's an period. I'll go by what's informed a little bit. My white girls, it's yeah, I'm ready to have my family.
That's really interesting.
So what does it say that my black girls are like, yeah, I can't count on nobody, so I need to be successful.
Mm,
And they're also not expecting to be chose because we also know that there's this rhetoric about black women.
yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, right, desirability politics shows up in freedom. What's informing freedom? Who feels desirable?
So that sounds like the opposite of freedom. You're telling me that these
Oh,
school kids have already, mapped out their lives. Like, well, I'm probably not going to get married. I'm going to have to fend for myself. I'm going to have to make all the money. So I'm going to just go hard from right now.
that yes, yes, yes. And I think that's the other thing too, when you think about therapy in itself, those who are coming to therapy is also something too about them valuing a level of self-worth that they are having because they do recognize that there is space that they need to process some of this stuff that's going on in them. Um, and so I appreciate that, but absolutely like to see Black girls kind of unconsciously subconsciously respond to what I call the defaults, these messaging about desirability and respectability. I'm trying to give them language. I'm giving them language for that, you know, um, that they are desirable. And so they can't believe what they are being taught, which is Black girls aren't desirable or they're too much. I'm trying not to be too much. So what is freedom if we can't ask for our needs to be met?
Yeah, you're pretty much a prisoner, like in your mind, even in your soul, to not
Oh.
want for something deeper or be able, I wonder if they might not at least have the thoughts, but they just won't verbalize it for fear that it'll not be received well,
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The world's not, you know, this is not about the oppression Olympics, right? But what we have to also recognize is that there is a racial caste system that is informed by race and gender and ability and sexual orientation at minimum and class, right? Economic, right? And so like we do ourselves a disservice if we feel like that hasn't informed us. That's why the resentment shows up in Black men on platforms, right? Because no, we recognize it's not all, right? My women who I'm usually supporting, they're like, so where the good guys at? Like you in the house minding their business, right? they've been in these streets, and they like, you know what? Let me go to Lowe's. Let me go to the library. Let me
Let me live
let
my
me go
life.
with Rose, right? Like that, like because people are weary and exhausted. And so, yes, it's one of those things where I'm like, I would say we need to toil the soil before we plant seeds. And toiling the soil is about dislodging our connection to oppressive messages that prevent us from accessing self permission, which is a gateway to freedom,
Yeah.
which is a gateway to freedom. So, yeah, these colonized streets ain't nice.
No. And
Ain't
I
nice.
the awakening know that we are, like people are getting it. Oh, actually, we are colonized, I'm loving, I've adjusted my feet, right? So I'm seeing, from the diaspora, I'm seeing also in Africa on the continent, where people are like, wait, you know, I see now even I really am hoping for a world where all 50, is it 54 or 55 nations in the continent follow the lead of the
54.
54, okay, the francophone countries,
Yes, yes, yes. And I was just saw this content creator, African content creator the other day. One African stream has recently been shut down because US state secretary called it a propagandist because it was reporting authentic, informed stories about the continent, and they were all over. And so they've lost their sponsorships, they've lost their funding, they've been demonetized on these social media platforms. And he made the announcement yesterday that they had to close. And so I think we have to recognize that imperialism, whether it's Russia or China, have always seen Africa for its beauty and its riches, and has done it to enrich themselves. And so, when you think about homophobia and transphobia, like, you follow the money. The money's from, churches and right wing white supremacist groups, right, who are using Christianity as a way of continuing to oppress. And so, sexuality and sexual freedom show up this way, right? And then you have folks, in the US who are looking at Africa to say, like, oh, this is, if Africa is homophobic, then, it was the white man's thing. It's like, no. Another content creator will tell you, like, if you look at African mythology, if you look at the cosmology, it's always been sexually expansive. If you look at leadership and reign, it's always been expansive. I went to this ancient Egyptian um museum, like, display when I visited New Orleans a couple of years ago, and I still have the picture and I gotta send it to you. But it's two women who are obviously lovers, right? But if you look at the caption, right, the caption is like two Egyptian royalty women who were sitting side by side, and it was something about their body language that was like, that's not just sisterly.
That's hilarious.
Right. And so the willful ignorance, the willful blindness to not see sexuality as expansive, right? To not see sexual attraction and relationships as expansive from the continent. It's just that it's willful ignorance. It's willful ignorance. But right now it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is continuing to oppress our sexual freedom and our sexual liberation, because now, folks are using present day homophobic laws as a way of saying, see, see, see. And it's like, no, no, no. And the
Yeah.
only thing that we can do is, like, continue to share stories, to continue to learn from our continental cousins, right? About these stories, to continue to look at ATRs, African tradition religions, to decolonize Christianity, and to look at decolonial ministers and ministry, to say, like, no, it hasn't always been this way. Um, I know we got off on a tangent right there, but, like,
No,
it's connecting
it's
all the
completely
pieces that I
connected. Yeah.
can and it's all connected. All of this is under the umbrella of Black sexual liberation. You don't have to get a degree, you don't have to have another program. You just have to understand that there are credible, learned sources, written work, right? When you think about book banning, written work in which it's there. And being a sex therapist, so one of my other degrees is in sex therapy, and it's because I wanted access to this. I knew I was not going to get it from my social work degree. I did not get it from my social work degree. I went to an HBCU, right, which is again a very Christian environment and a very sex negative and sex oppressed environment, because that is the protective response to historical sexual violence. And so for me, it was I needed access. And so I used academia as a way to access. And then what it gave me were my colleagues who introduced me to bell hooks and Audre Lorde. I'm in my 40s and I'm being introduced to like prolific Black women who are sex positive, who've been writing these stories. And I'm like, oh, and then you have contemporaries who are also like uplifting, like Amina Peterson, like Debbie Ward, right? Who are doing the work about through their lineages of really providing space for Black liberation to take place in really profound ways. And so I think, what you and I have access to and with sharing with others is that Black sexual liberation is possible at a collective level.
And it can change the collective consciousness.
It does. It absolutely does. That is not just about healing, but restoration and repair. And you're not going to get past this bitterness because, whoo, Chile, you already know when you've been hurt, that choice you can make to continue to allow to, the to allow the anger to become bitterness, right? Versus anything else, despair, hope, right? Like you have to go through this grief and mourning period.
Yeah.
And that again, two things can hold a space at the same time. And I feel like see the deja vu, but I was just talking about this the other day where I was like, there's mourning, I wasn't doing this in supervision. There's mourning that can happen, right? Because you're mourning the loss of, and then there's joy and anticipation, right? That desire that's like, ooh, but I can also. Um, and to me, that's embodiment work. We can embody trauma. Why not embody our healing? Why not embody our connection? Why not
Why not?
embody our power?
100%, And as I was listening to you, I was like, I hope I didn't look like a Bobby doll, because I was just like, yes, yes, yes. But
No, I appreciate the affirmation because I was like, hold on, let me pull it on back because again, I recognize there are a lot of dots, and I'm neurodivergent, and so I think that's the other thing too when we're talking about like having connections and them being very authentic. And as you and I are even like building our relationship, it really is being able to have this presence practice of understanding myself and how much space I am taking because this is a dialogue, right? And knowing like, yeah, all right, I'm neurodivergent. So when I get on this point, I like to take it all the way through from 101 to 501. But I'm like, no, the whole point is to stay right here, 201 to 301, and 101, y'all, is like beginning. 501 is, I won't say mastery, but I would say very learned,
yes.
right? Because in life, there is no mastery, right? And I
There's
think
look, there's death.
right there's well, mastery in the sense of like mastery is not the final destination. I'll put it that way because we are taught about what does it take to master certain things. And so yes, there's a certain level of skill and proficiency, but it's a continuous journey. And I love putting the dots together from 101 to 501.
And I love the way you do it. You're so eloquent with it. And thank you so much. I'm going to have you come back because, in the
Yes.
month of July, I'm talking
Mhm.
about, what is it? Reclaiming your wholeness over 50. And you qualify.
Why, thank you very much. I so appreciate that. Because listen, it gets better.
Yes,
It gets better.
clearly.
I'm just saying, right? Presence, practice, intentional effort, y'all. It gets better. And so thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation because it's so powerful, so important. And I hope it really encourages folks, right? And I hope this encourages y'all. When you do feel overwhelmed, give yourself some grace, right? Because you don't have to know it all. We don't know it all. We are just expressing like where we are. And God is joy is just holding the space for this conversation, which again, I truly appreciate.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And
Like,
for those of you who viewed and listened today, go back, listen again, watch again, and share with another heart, share with another soul, and don't spend another day
mhm,
missing out on your life.
absolutely. Till next time.
Later. Thank you for listening to What People Miss. Now you can see clearly that life truly is lived in the breaths between the large moments. I invite you to move from surviving to savoring so that you rewire your body for pleasure and emotional freedom. To find out more about my programs, consulting, and retreats, visit my website, cordeliagaffar.com. Until next week, choose joy and always pleasure.